Hey everyone, back again for CCT 250. Today we're talking about a very hot topic in hacking in general, and as well as in networking security, cybersecurity, social engineering. Loose lips sink ships. So our learning objective is to analyze vulnerabilities exploited by hackers. And our key concepts are going to be different types of social engineering attacks, how tech and social engineering interact, because social engineering can largely take place offline. And then we're going to talk about some best practices for passwords and social networking risks and how we can remediate those. So some terms we want to be aware of for Chapter 13 are going to be Facebook security, which is kind of an odd term. Password best practices, which is definitely a strong concept. The password manager. Safe computing, which is more of a set of concepts in and of itself rather than a single term. Social engineering in general, a social engineering attack, a social engineering scam, and then just the concept of social networking. So often the best way to be aware of how to solve a problem is to have a clear definition of what it is. So when we say what is social engineering, what we're talking about is manipulation of human nature and tricking and coercing people into violating security practices, revealing information about policies, procedures, behaviors, down to straight out data, passwords, passcodes, potential points of contact, things like that. Now, viruses, Trojan horses, all of that malware stuff relies on trickery to be effective as well, but that has to be programmed because you're manipulating code. You're not manipulating people in most ways. But if we point this code at people to where they download something that is going to be within a certain security perimeter or something that they would log into, then that can be a way in which technology and social engineering meet. Social engineering in general relies on how ignorant a person may be of how valuable their personal information is, or how much their corporate information or corporate knowledge may be, or their authority or their position. All data has value. A lot of people don't think of it that way outside of security, but it's just how it's used. So if somebody's looking to steal, use, or sell this information, that information has value in some capacity. Social engineering is pretty dangerous, though, because it's harder to tell when an attack has gone out. And if it's successful, an authorized individual could be carrying out dangerous actions on behalf of an unauthorized party. Kind of like when you go to the airport and they say, have your bags been in your possession the whole time? Has anyone asked you to carry anything on the plane? Blah, blah, blah. That's a very visible version of what we're talking about here. The social engineering in general tends to be a little bit more subtle. So some different types of attacks that we might see would be physical attacks, where people make personal contact. A physical object, where a smartphone, USB drive, or file folder is tampered with in some way. And then psychological attacks may use elements of both physical and physical object attacks and manipulate the way somebody thinks about information. Now, some subcategories would be things like phone-based attacks, which is where a hacker will call and impersonate some trustworthy person, making use of that trust relationship, and try and gather information. So you may hear of things like pretexting, which is where somebody is going to call under the pretext of being a research organization or similar, and they are trying to gather information for a research firm, or they're trying to take a survey, Gallup poll, things like that. Dumpster diving, it's exactly what it sounds. People are pawing through the trash, trying to find information like contact lists, manuals, memorandums, calendars, printouts of important documents. Social engineers often go dumpster diving for valuable information that may not have been shredded. Now, for a lot of things that people think about as being important, like medical data, or if somebody has a transcript or things like that, they may be like, oh yeah, that needs to go in the shred bin. And companies don't often make enough emphasis of the shred bin as being, if you got it and it's got any kind of protected information on it or anything that might be sensitive, pitch it in the shred bin. We're not paying by the pound or anything. Um, Shoulder surfing. This is where people can just peep over your shoulder. Where they may be watching you put in a code or put in a password. This can also include, technologically speaking, hidden cameras. So it doesn't necessarily have to be physical observation by the person. It can be physical observation through a recording device. You can also use a card skimmer. You could have somebody who plugs in a card skimmer at a gas pump and is able to capture card information. Social media information, using phishing emails, fake forms, things like that to be able to gather information through social media, spoofing passwords, being able to do cloned profiles, things like that. Persuasion and coercion. This is a psychological subcategory where you will either goad or directly coerce somebody into taking action. So you can either prod them gently or give them a little bit more of a, almost to where you get to extortion and blackmail. Reverse social engineering. This is an interesting one. In this attack, the volunteer of the information is the victim. They're basically like, oh yeah, this is blah blah blah. Attacker will, instead of pursuing the information overtly, will set up a scenario where the victim will seek assistance, such as tech support or something similar, and the victim will voluntarily disclose the information under the assumption that it is a trusted individual. So not too far from the phone-based attacks we were talking about at the beginning. Some defenses, things that may help us. A pop-up blocker. It seems really pedestrian, but it is true that pop-up ads are still going to be a fairly common way in which people will try and manipulate your activities online. This helps your browser to block any unwanted or potentially dangerous pop-up ads and other messages, or at least to make you aware of their presence. Unsafe site warnings. You'll usually see this with modern browsers, that it'll warn you that like a certificate is expired, or it's an unusual redirect or something similar, so that fraudulent or untrusted sites don't load, or at least give you a moment to where you have to confirm that you want to go to that particular site before doing so. Integration with antivirus and anti-malware software, so your browser can incorporate plugins, browser-side tools that work with the diagnostic side of your antivirus or anti-malware software in order to perform analysis of the sites that you're visiting and the content of those sites. Automatic updates. Generally, I would say that for most users, automatic updates are fine. I have a little bit more of a hesitation in certain cases, simply because of the breadth of tools that I use. So certain things might accidentally break something that I'm going to need. So I will have to look at my site listings and be like, okay, these are the updates that I need to put up. What are they going to do? And I can tell pretty quickly whether or not it's going to have a negative effect. An alternative to this, if you want to have automatic updates, is to use restore points, so that you can roll back pre-update just in case something doesn't work. So in either event, if you have some form of protective response to where something stops working, you can figure out why, and you can smoothly be able to transition back to a previous snapshot. Private browsing capability. So you may have heard of incognito mode or hidden mode or whatever else. Bear in mind, this isn't going to hide anything from your ISP. This is simply going to keep it from retaining cookies and any other kind of content history, if you will. So it's not going to keep any track of what sites you visited, what logons you may have used, any kind of information retrieved from there. At the end of it, when it closes out, it's as if it never happened. I mean, insofar as anything can be erased on a computer. Some other good practices. There's a documentary talking about Walmart, which is the high price of low cost. It made me think of this when I read this in the text. The potentially high price of free Wi-Fi. Whenever we have a free Wi-Fi site floating around, you go to Starbucks, you go to Barnes & Noble, you go to McDonald's, you go to the AT&T store, and they have free Wi-Fi, what you have to think about is what's the motivation? And in most cases, it's just an attractant to get people in there, because if you're in there and you're using your device or whatever else, number one, like a phone store, and I know this because I used to use this technique myself, if somebody has their phone out in order to browse something, you know what phone they have and you know what upgrades might be out there, you can open that conversation a little bit more comfortably. And they're already in your store taking advantage of a service, so they're a little bit more amenable to, oh, this person, they got to do their job, they got to do their little sales pitch. So the other issue is free Wi-Fi has to be accessible. People can't have ridiculous amounts of security in place. People don't want to install profiles and all this stuff, and if the password's too complicated and blah, 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 blah. So that tends to be something that they are not interested in pursuing. So free Wi-Fi tends to be very susceptible to evil twin attacks, to rogue APs, to people who are trying to, poison the local ARP cache, things like that. Always be careful about accessing secure websites in public as well. Even on your phone, you may think, oh, it's a direct connection between me and my cell tower, blah, blah, blah. It's still passing through the air. So that means that there are purposes for interception that could be done. And that means that unsafe information could be put in play. So you always want to make sure that you're using HTTPS or a VPN if possible, things like that. So data encryption needs to be part of your headspace when you're dealing with that. Anytime you're accessing any kind of secure piece of information, make sure that your browser and your device is going to be secure as well. And again, of course, we always get into the semantics of what is secure, how secure is secure. Is there a measure of overkill that can be in place? And there absolutely can. Be wary of public computers, very much in the same stripe. Public computers, any computer that's not within your control, to be able to examine what data is kept, how that data is used. Always be a little bit wary. Make sure your home network is secure too. Don't just assume that because you have a hard line, automatically it's some kind of magic intrusion-proof zone. You still need to go through and make sure that you change the default settings on your router and make sure that your Wi-Fi uses an appropriate encryption level for data being passed around. Use a guest network if you have to. Be cautious about saving personal information on shopping sites. This is something that I find is very tempting for people, is to save their username and password for all the sites they use. It's very convenient, especially now, like if you use, I know Apple in particular does this with the Face ID, but with Android, of course, there's other, pattern-based recognition to where you can unlock passwords using biometrics. That's great, but that still provides a lot of preloaded information that somebody could possibly compromise if somebody were to breach your personal device, whatever that may be, laptop, desktop, phone, tablet, doesn't matter. Keep your personal computer personal. So what I would recommend at that point is, if you can, if you have to access things through your personal computer for a business purpose, I may recommend creating a secondary account on your computer to be able to do that. I recommend that anyway in a lot of cases, to where you have an administrator account and then you have a standard daily driver user account, and then you have to log in with admin credentials if you want to make any changes. It's just compartmentalization. It keeps things from overlapping too much, to where if there is a breach in one aspect of your machine, that it doesn't completely ruin everything else. Don't install software that you don't want. I mean, I don't know why I have to say that, but there are, like, sometimes in order to get, certain promos, it'll be like, oh, if you install this ad and run it for 30 minutes, we'll give you X number of points in this particular online currency or what have you. There are definitely things like that that are out there. So just be aware that, there's always going to be a cost. Stuff that's free online has some sort of associated cost. You have to be able to weigh those things out. Don't overlook the malware risks to Apple and Linux computers as well as mobile devices. This is something that, I swear, up until around 2009, I think still I heard a number of people thinking that Apple and Linux machines were largely immune to malware. And that mobile devices were too. Very few people in that sphere were worried about antivirus or anti-malware for their phone. Thankfully, devices like Lookout started to kind of pop up. I'm sorry, programs like Lookout. And then we had, Kaspersky got into mobile antivirus and things like that. Just because the systems are harder to see the underlying configurations and things like that, and just because it isn't as common, doesn't mean that malware is not capable of existing on those machines. With Linux machines, as long as somebody can crack the root password or the sudo password for that particular command sequence, they can do pretty much anything that an administrator could do. So you always want to be very aware of that. There's a lot of versatility that comes with using Linux. I love using Linux. I have several Linux machines that I work with. Does not mean that they're more secure. It just means that there's a different type of security that has to be incorporated in order to be appropriate for use in business and personal computing and things like that. Another thing about social engineering that's important to be aware of is know what the web knows about you. If you ever put your name into a Google search, and it depends on how common your name is or how uncommon it is, you'd be surprised and probably terrified at the amount of information that's out there. And as a parent, I have to be very aware of that as well for my son. I want to make sure that his social media presence and stuff is something that he has control of when he gets older. He's many, many years away from worrying about that, but I have to think about that now because the footprints that are being built for kids in the 21st century are so different than they were for people at the end of the 20th century, like me. So websites like Spokeo, Intellius, PeopleSearch, PIPL, People, Zabasearch, there's a ton of them out there. White Pages used to be a big one that you could use. Facebook, of course, I'm leaving as last here. Several sites that contain a ton of different personal information categories, ripe for data mining in many, many cases. And that's another extension. Data miners will buy bulk data from companies like your grocery store and use your shopping habits and your phone number and things like that in order to incorporate a profile. You ever wonder why you save money on a box of cereal that normally costs $6 and they cut it down to $3? It's because that data can be consolidated and sold in order to track shopping habits, but it can also be sold for more nefarious purposes. A lot of sheriff's vehicles in California have scanners that sit on top of the vehicle that can run across 8 lanes of traffic just to capture license plates and figure out where somebody is relative to position to their vehicle, so they can have an idea of who's traveling where and who's in what city. And that data can be aggregated and sold in certain cases, depending on what the privacy agreements are in certain states, which is why California has such an aggressive data usage policy. Really, the shining example tends to be the UK right now, but again, there's still flaws in it, and there have to be people who are aware of the changes that are out there so that those flaws can be patched and we can have a more useful environment in which to operate. Before I transition to the next slide, part of the reason why it's important to know what the web knows about you is because any information that is present here, any personally identifiable information, should be immediately excluded from any form of password that you're going to use, because that's the kind of information that's going to be dumped into a dictionary for somebody to use when they start trying to crack your passwords. So when we're creating and managing passwords, we want to think about separate passwords for different types of accounts. Length is more important than complexity. Make sure they're not too easy to guess, so we want to include numbers and special characters. Something I do not like, however, is when websites require a ton of different criteria, because the more criteria that you include, the more that you are giving rules to people who are going to run password crackers to try and figure out what a particular password might be. So if you're saying you must have a password that is at least 12 characters long, and it has to include one number, it has to include one uppercase and one lowercase letter, one special character, you're going to start forcing rules about where those characters have to fall. because if it's a capital letter, it cannot be also a lowercase letter. If it is a letter, it cannot also be a number. So you have those variations that are going to start getting included into the list, and it's going to reduce the computational complexity of figuring out that password. Variations on a single base password are okay, but if anybody figures out what that single base password is, through password breaches or things like that, that's traditionally not great. So just be aware of that. Make a list of accounts to which you apply the new passwords. Like a physical, like little notebook, that's not, I know people that do that. But again, you have a physical token that is then possible to have stolen. Something that I will say is that you can cipher that material. If there's a transition to how you have it written down, things like that, it can make your life a little bit easier in case there is a loss. Change your passwords regularly. Make sure that you have a window in which your passwords get switched over. Invest in a password manager. There's a ton of them out there. So a password manager, for those of you who don't know, helps you organize and track your usernames and passwords. There are some that are built into browsers. I don't tend to like those because the digests are pretty easy to break. But you can also invest in some that are slightly more aggressive, like Zoho or Dashlane or Sticky Password, Password Boss. LastPass probably being the gold standard for most people. It's not perfect, obviously. It used to be free. Now they've migrated towards a pay model. But you know what? You get what you pay for with stuff online. So just bear that in mind. I know people who use passwords and in some cases are passphrases that are over 100 characters long. And in that case, that is a significant increase in security versus, password 123. Some things to think about with social engineering and social networking. Before you post anything online, be it to a Yelp review or to a tweet or a Facebook post or an Instagram picture, what is it you're really trying to convey? What is it you're really trying to share? How sensitive could this information be? Would you share this information with somebody if you were meeting face to face? How would you feel if this was spread around the world? What if your parents or your children read this information? Is there anything in there that is considered a breach or a potential breach? And these are all they're very tightly worded questions, but there is a range of interpretation that can be applied. There is some concern there. So it's really just making sure that you think about what you're posting before you post, because in the age of the internet, we have kind of this ubiquitous sense of everything's going to be online anyway. I may as well post what I'm thinking. And while that is certainly a way to do things, there are consequences that come from that behavior. So we always want to be aware of that, especially if we work in any kind of cyber technology that involves intercommunication and data management. When we're looking at social networking, we have to think about what platform we're on, and usually these 4 questions will help us to figure out whether or not we're in the right space. How common are scams? How often do you hear about scams occurring on this platform? What are the risks of being a part of this platform? What scams should people be alerted to? And how do businesses respond to the risks of social networks? What restrictions are in place? And if we can answer those questions and we feel comfortable with it, then we can identify whether or not a particular platform is more or less susceptible to social engineering risks. So as of 2020, obviously these numbers will have changed. Facebook has about 2 billion users. Instagram has 700 million. Twitter has about 328 million. Tons of volume, tons of interactivity, tons of reach. So based on this, you can see why criminals would look up people on social media sites to identify and target people. Now, obviously, there's a lot of talk about Twitter right now that Elon Musk's regime has taken control, and you can see that they're cutting through bots and trying to figure out ways to test the actual responsiveness of the platform to certain issues. We want to make sure that how many errors would be considered endemic to the platform itself, not just to social media. So I think this is going to be an interesting experiment to see how Twitter reacts, and then we can probably see that spread to Facebook and Instagram and TikTok and other platforms. Some mistakes you do not want to make. Don't use your password over and over and over and over again. That's a bad idea. Don't share too much information. TMI is definitely something you want to be aware of. Don't engage in tweet rage. Again, there's outrage that happens in certain cases whenever we're dealing with, sensitive topics. There will be things that talk about, sensitive topics like self-harm or trafficking or eating disorders, or there's things that people don't necessarily react to with the same level of calm and composure that we would hope. But that's because that's how those posts are designed. They are designed to evoke an emotional response. So if you engage in this way, you can make tactical errors, if you will. You can unleash a part of your brain that says, no, I'm going to go ahead and post this. It's okay. And you lose that critical thinking aspect. So you want to be very careful. Remember to protect your own brand. And it sounds very pretentious, but if you're going to exist in cyberspace, there is a reputation that will follow you. And not necessarily saying that you're like, oh, my vanity has to flare up and this is what I have to do in order to be considered an acceptable person or what have you. But if you have a strong reputation, you don't want to lose it over something ridiculous, right? Be ready to protect your corporate brand, because you never know whether or not you're going to become attached to a group in which your online reputation will become even more important. So we want to think ahead and think in the now. It's demanding a lot, I know. But a lot of it is simply just taking a step back, taking a breath and saying, what am I gaining by posting this? What am I losing? What am I yielding up that might be potentially hazardous? And a lot of people don't think about the nature of a banal post, seemingly benign, that has something really sensitive in it. You don't necessarily think about that. Some common scams in social media that you might see. Secret celebrity gossip. If you click on a link to, this person or this person is doing X, Y, or Z thing, see pictures or videos here. This can lead to malicious sites that can install malware on your machine, or will, try and, submit viruses or scareware or ransomware. I'm trapped in Paris, please send money. Somebody is trapped in a foreign location and asked to borrow money. Yeah, obviously that's going to be something you want to verify. Did you see this picture of yourself? People are trying to manipulate the idea that there's some photo out there that's you doing something embarrassing and you got to pay money to make it go away. The link itself will be a credential theft. It's a phishing scam. Test your IQ. Trying to get personal data of various questions. It feeds your ego a little bit. Join the class of 2013 Facebook group. Whenever you are part of a organized group that you want to kind of share connectivity with, it's like, oh yeah, I wouldn't mind reconnecting with some of my classmates from this period. They appear organized by the college or university, but they are not. So you want to be aware of that. Tweet for cash. Yeah, well, this preys on greed and curiosity. You're cute. Message me on Facebook. Well, it sounds like sexual solicitation. And that is a pretty successful tactic. I can't tell you how many emails my wife gets about erectile dysfunction. I was like, it's an interesting category, honey. So, it's not necessarily primed to be the most rational, but very much like you hear about in these courses by these guys who are like, I can tell you how to pick up any woman, these really predatory and gross, things that they put online is, one yes out of 99 no's is still a yes. And it's just like, okay, so if you're casting a really wide net, yielding any result is a positive. And that's what they're looking at. Protect the family from H1N1 flu. If you're looking for, salacious news, again, secret celebrity gossip, instead, this applies to somebody's, sense of morality or things like that. They pick a user that's in your list, in this case, just a generic, Mike Smith commented on a post. And it's like, especially if it's somebody that you interact with a lot, it may pop up like that, so that way you're like, oh, let me see what they said. And again, it's going to be logon capture. It's a harvesting set. Amber Alert issued. These traditionally are going to be hoaxes. Now be careful, because if it's an Amber Alert sent to your email, that's traditionally not the case. A lot of times now, you'll get an alert directly to your phone, same as you would for like the National Weather Service or things like that if you live in a disaster-prone area. So just be careful. Does it seem unusual that you're getting this information in this way? Does it seem like, if you go to the Test Your IQ site and the questions are all about you rather than any kind of information that would be more generic, well, that becomes a little bit more questionable, doesn't it? In a corporate setting, we have to be aware of a couple of different things regarding social networking. First thing is, a lot of companies don't actually have policies in place. So it's kind of a per case basis, which means that the rules are going to be inconsistent, and also that there's not really going to be a whole lot of direction from IT to how to handle things other than just don't do it, right? The opposite can also be true, to where companies are like, I don't know, I guess just do whatever, but don't, try and sell anything through the company site. Companies aren't necessarily aware of how risky it can be, phishing sites and things like that people just click on links, sitting on their lunch break, and they're clicking through and looking at stuff. About 50% of companies that were surveyed the last time that this was put together had some form of social networking policy. It did not say how robust or how comprehensive that policy was. It just said that there was one. In a corporate setting, there can be concern about oversharing company activities, things that are going on. People are excited by a particular project or a partnership with another company, things like that. Mixing personal with professional, blending things together in terms of what should be disclosed. Maybe using slightly looser language in terms of getting kind of sweary in certain cases regarding stuff for the business, and that can be very negative in certain perceptive circles. Tweet rage, which we talked about earlier. Collecting too many connections. We don't know who is who, and we don't also think about the extended network of a trust relationship, to where I'm friends with this person, but I'm not friends with this person, but that person is friends with the first person. So they may have access through friend of a friend access of some kind. Somebody shares something of mine. It shows up on their page, and then I start losing grip of how far this reaches. Password sloth, to where, again, we're having the same password for too many accounts, not using a particularly strong password in place. Trigger fingering, this is where we click on links without investigating first, just kind of blasting through. That's not necessarily a great idea, so we always want to be aware of what the link contains before we start digging through, especially in a potentially sensitive environment. That is always something you want to do. Avoid endangering yourself and others by being aware of what information you are producing about yourself. A username that doesn't include personal information would be a good idea. Set up a separate email that doesn't use your real name, and use that to register and receive mail from sites that require registration. This is not the same thing as a burner account. This is a dummy account. Dummy accounts are ones that you actually preserve. They can build a profile similar to that of a standard data mine profile, but because they don't have your real name and real information attached, it's a little bit more decentralized. A burner account would be where you create an email, use it to sign up for something, and then discard it. Use a strong password, always. Flip back to Chapter 7 if you need to for rules on what constitutes a strong password. And remember, one of the biggest rules is, no PII, and have a suitable amount of length. And keep your profile closed. Only allow friends to view it, people that you can verify that you know. If you must have any kind of professional or non-personal relations or connectivity through a social media platform, consider modifying your privacy settings to be able to have one that's more for acquaintances than it is for people who actually know you. Don't say anything or publish pictures that might cause you embarrassment later. Automatic uploads should be turned off on your photos, things like that. Use privacy features on the sites that you use to restrict strangers' access to your file. Be guarded about whom you identify and invite into your network. Particularly be on guard against phishing scams because they are frighteningly creative these days. If somebody sends you something that seems a little bit too good to be true, it probably is. So you want to make sure that you're aware of that you're protecting yourself. Facebook in particular, there's a couple of different sites out there about the Facebook Guide to Privacy, how to be able to have that limited version of your profile, that cut down version. Think carefully about how you acquire connections, who you allow to become a friend. I actually have a couple of friends who have like a likes page, like it's a non-personal profile page, almost like a fan page. But it sounds really egotistical when you say it that way, but it's something that they use for business connectivity, to where somebody can contact their page and identify and interact with them, but it's not their personal information. It is the curated information that they want to put together for their profile. Another item on Facebook, which is true for most websites, turn everything off and then turn the options on one by one if you need them, if it is something that you know you're going to require. And you'll be surprised at how little you actually need to be able to function in the capacity that you likely want to for these sites. So we covered our topics, different types of social engineering attacks, how technology and social engineering interact, and how technology can be completely absent from social engineering in certain cases. Best practices for passwords, again, tap back to Chapter 7 if you need to look back over some of those rules. And then social networking risks, several different types of risks that are out there. So, as per usual, I absolutely appreciate you guys. Your time and attention is very, very valuable to me, because I know that I've gotten comments that these slides are really helping, so I hope that that continues to be the case. If you need anything, just message me through the normal avenues. You can get me on email, you can get me on Blackboard, you can get me on the YouTube channel here, or contact me through my Google Voice number, or just come on by the office. As per usual, come on by the office. I am, just hanging out and ready to see people. So please, I love to put names to faces and be able to interact with you. So that is Chapter 13. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate you very much, and I will see you next time. Have a good one.